Welcome everybody to the second or third session of the winter school. Today we have the pleasure of welcoming Simone Sandholz. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Great. And I'm gonna say a few words about Simone. I'm very excited that Simone is here. I think her research is of great interest to many of you, based on your backgrounds. So let me say a few words about Simone. Simone leads the urban research and policy at the United Nations University Institute for Environment and Human Security. Her focus is on urban and regional development and systemic transformation towards sustainability. And among other things, she also manages an initiative on transformative urban coalitions under the International Climate Initiative. She has worked on multiple projects connected with the UN, but you have received her bio, and we are going to make her bio, her full detailed bio, available in the materials online. I would like to say a few words about her presentation today. The title of her presentation is going to be The Role of Nature-Based Solutions for Urban Sustainability Transformation. And I think the best thing I can do is to leave the floor to Simone so that we can enjoy her input and followed by a discussion with everybody. Thank you so much for being here, Simone, and welcome to our winter school.
Thanks so much, and thanks for having me. And the bios look very impressive, and I also saw that there's a few students of ours that are attending. So I'm trying not to duplicate what I'm telling you in lectures, but by coincidence, the transformation lecture was also the one I had to give there. So okay. I'm trying not to replicate too much. And please, everyone, if there's questions, I think we will have time afterwards. But if there's any major issues, then you also please just interrupt me in between. So you should already see my screen, are you? Yes. Yeah. Perfect. With the multiple screens, I'm never sure. So yes, as Martha has said, and thanks for the invite. It's always a pleasure. And we definitely need more projects with you, Martha. Gonna talk about nature-based solutions, but also sustainability transformation. So transformation is a bigger research topic of ours over the last year. And I think it's also increasingly taken up in policy and in general discourses that we need to transform to become more sustainable and so on. But the question is, what does it actually mean? So I promise I'm torturing you with very few definitions and theories only, but the IPCC does define transformation as a change in the fundamental attributes of natural and human systems. So it's a fundamental change. It's a deep change. And there's also a growing body of literature that is working on urban transformation. Meanwhile, I also brought you like only two definitions or only two authors that are speaking about that. But you see, it's a fundamental shift. So it's like something which is more than just some measures that might cure some symptoms. It's a more deeper and profound change. Some authors would also argue it's irreversible. So it's really something that's moving systems. And very often you would find transformation then depicted along these kind of lines, mostly the green one that you see in this figure. And I borrowed that from the last year's Global Sustainable Development Report, which has been drafted by an international author team. So according to them, transformation would have three phases, so like emergence, acceleration, and then the new system kind of stabilizes. And while we're implementing new system features, of course, maybe the current one, the dominant one, the less sustainable or unsustainable one kind of fades out. What is most interesting to me in research also is this first phase that they call emergence, and that then moves into this acceleration phase where a new system features become more dominant, become taken up. And there you see in this publication, they say, they depicted it as a little bit of a back and forth where you have some potentially enabling factors, but then also some impediments. And only after a while, after some ripple effect, so to say, there's a tipping point after which then it's accelerating. If you at the same time look at other publications, other authors, in the end, the understanding is kind of comparable. That is definitely the most complex figure I will be showing here. That's from the last sixth assessment of the IPCC. So what you see here is that if you follow the more green-colored transect or the green-colored trajectories, it's also this upward moving thing, right? This upward moving tendency. The difference here is that they showcase it as not like a linear path, this move towards more climate resilient development. So in that case, IPCC obviously is around climate change, but what they also say is that on the top right side, you would find transformation and system transitions as key factors of these more sustainable, these more climate resilient trajectories. And very interestingly, they do not see it, as I said, as this linear path, but that as like multiple decision points, multiple interactions, which is taking place in this so-called arenas of engagement that you find on the left side. And these arenas of engagement, there's multiple ones. They say it's community, social culture, political, but also ecological. So we can very well fit nature-based solutions in here, besides then obviously also knowledge, technology, and economic and financial arena. So let's say there's in the end, to have a system shift, we also need to change different features of that system. So that's depicting this broader change that would be needed. And how do we now get there? And how does this now take place with the help of NbS or towards NbS? So first of all, nature or ecology is a fundamental part of that. But what does it take to get there? So here the community and the knowledge arenas are super important. And that is the case because we would need capacities to change, and capacities in the sense of knowledge, also transformation knowledge. How would this happen? How can it happen? But also knowledge around maybe new measures, as I would argue, nature-based solutions could be one, because I know I don't have to tell this to Marta because she's way more into the topic than I am recently, but they're also described very often as some more, let's say, coming with more benefits and co-benefits than traditional approaches of, for instance, risk reduction or climate adaptation, compared to now the same benefits that, or the same, say, protective functions that nature-based solutions could provide, but they do more. So in that sense, they could be transformative. And you read the very top definition, the quote that says, transformation will also entail reimagined goals and also the capacities to pursue them. So the reimagination, that something could be done in a different way and maybe with better results. That can be changing livelihoods, but it can also be changing protective functions, making people more resilient to climate impacts, for example. But it requires the capacities and the skills, and only that way we would come to the transformative change needed. I'm now moving to the more holistic views. In the climate sphere, so if you talk about climate adaptation, very often they do make the difference between incremental change and transformative change. To my students, I try to explain it as incremental change might be the baby steps, that's a little by little, but it might not provide enough protection in the very end. It might not bring us all the way needed. And for that, also UNFCCC, we're just sitting next door. They're now having ongoing discussions that we need to move towards some more transformative change. They call it transformative adaptation. I brought you this figure because I think that publication they're trying to look into the opportunity of climate risk management by different measures, and how far that can be a trigger, that can be a catalyst for broader transformative change. And if you just look at the examples they're giving from reactive adaptation, which is basically a do-nothing scenario, or maybe, I think, yeah, one example is placing sandbags if there's a flooding, which just cures some symptoms but doesn't necessarily help, towards the more incremental one, which could be the flat wall, the concrete one, towards the transformative adaptation. And if you just look at the figures on the right, what you see is nature-based solutions, right? On a landscape approach, you would see, like, for instance, on the flooding, they promote floating neighborhoods, green roofs, facades, but on a landscape approach. So it's not like you install one green roof, which absorbs or reduces, decelerates the water runoff, but it's more of a broader approach with different measures being combined, but definitely including nature-based solution. The other example on the top is on managing heat, but it's following basically the same approach. So from giving examples on very reactive towards the transformative one. And on the transformative, again, you see urban green infrastructure, nature-based solution, but also linked to health system innovation. So also build and non-build, let's say, social features or different ways of doing things, but also a different merger of measures. So the question now is, we already know about these measures and that they might make sense, including nature-based solutions, but how do we get there? How do we get either from the reactive or the incremental towards the transformation? And what role can cities play in there? And why does it make sense doing it in urban areas? Obviously. We recently did a global literature review. That figure is not from that. I'm still waiting for it to be published. It takes forever. But it's a bit comparable in this. So ours was on urban, and this is a more generic one. But you would find very often in literature that the move from either do nothing or the more incremental, the baby steps towards the transformative approaches, towards transformation, is very much based on learning, including the learning by doing, and that is experimentation, trying it out. And well, also these, they call it safe to fail experiments here. So basically just kind of try and error and safe to fail in the climate domain means, so without necessarily having very bad implication. But in the end, it's important that you try, and that it's a procedural approach where you might not exactly know how the system would look like exactly thereafter, but you would know into which direction it is moving. And then it's a bit of a try and error, where you also kind of look into where in the end also actors might work together in a very different way than they did before. And that links very much to urban areas, where I don't know how, well, I've had to look at the bios, but of course they don't say everything. So I know that that a good share of you has also experience on cities and working there. But one key feature of cities and one key challenge of cities is that there's besides all the formal governance and all the more formalized processes, there's already more than 1 billion global inhabitants. Well, the figure here now, the map I showed you is on slums, but a larger share of these inhabitants do not only live in precarious situations, but also live in informality, which means they're not part of the formal system of formal decision making. And very often they're even forgotten and even purposefully ignored in decision making, though that has improved over the last years. There's, again, on the other hand, there's a growing pressure on urban areas, including from climate change, but also natural hazard-induced disaster impacts that force people to move, and to very often move into cities. So on the bottom you see the numbers will be rising in the future, and that will add additional stress, particularly on cities that already have a larger share of informal and of people living in informality. And so the question is, how can these people be supported? Because they're very often living and dwelling in places that are at a higher risk than other parts of the city. There's reasons why some areas are left vacant. That's, for instance, steep slopes or along rivers, so prone to landslides, prone to flooding, prone to other things, and not being part of decision making, not having any power here, and not having any social safety nets. But most importantly, not most importantly, but very importantly, also not being part of decision making. Nevertheless, on the other hand, nature-based solutions have already proven to be very helpful for reducing risk and also for climate change adaptation, very often with the same measures. It's, however, difficult to implement that in the context of informal settlements, because very often, that's not the ideal photo to show it, very often they're built very densely, and nature-based solutions can only be introduced then afterwards, but not in parallel to the construction processes, because again, they're developing very dynamically, and maybe sometimes it's only happening once there is a kind of a formalization process or even a reconstruction process. That's what this photo is showing. That's from a city in northern Brazil. So NbS in urban areas might have a very huge transformative potential. That's, again, these are some statements from the literature we have reviewed. And how could that look like? Showing this to you in a second based on examples from 2 different cities. However, that would need to be supported not only by design guidelines, which is the obvious, right? We need to know what to do and where to do it, but also by education, by capacitating people implementing it, but also then in charge of it, and by leadership, and most importantly, citizen involvement. So it's not only a top-down, it's not unimaginable in a top-down scenario only, because you also need acceptance and you need the maintenance. And if that is not there, there's a high risk of losing the potential and the protective functions of nature-based solutions. And one quote that I like quite a bit is, or one statement from Cousins and Wamsle, is that transformative nature-based solution implementation would require co-production, for instance, by something like living labs. And I had to bring you this because that's exactly what we're doing in the project that Marta mentioned beforehand. But most important here is this co-production. If you recall the figure I showed you on the previous slide, it's about the learning, it's about the co-production, and then also the ownership. So that also includes cities. And I'm doing this now particularly on informality, because that's kind of counterintuitive and contradicting the normal approaches, particularly, but we're talking about the people who might need it the most because they're living in the most hazardous areas. But if then NbS implementation should be transformative, we do need the learning, we do need the co-design, we need the co-production, but that's exactly what is not happening in these areas because of the informality and because of being excluded from the formal decision-making. Next to other factors, as I said, lack of space and also lack of financial means and so on. So in the end, it's not being addressed systematically. So we're leaving aside kind of a huge potential for improving livelihoods and reducing the risk of that population here. So what we need to develop is forms of engagement that do align, that are co-produced, or that involve co-production, and that has to go in line with the values, with the perceptions of these communities. So just imposing without buy-in and without perhaps the needed awareness raising and capacitation might be prone to failure and might also not result in tapping the benefits that nature-based solutions have to their full potential. And I'm leaving the exact definition of these potentials a bit out because I suppose that you have that in other lectures, because I know some of the other lectures being involved here, but I can give a few examples. So I brought you 2 examples. Based on a publication that will be out hopefully in a couple of weeks. At least it's accepted already, but they're a bit slow on it. So that is, we try to look into the implementation of nature-based solutions in 2 informal settlements, in Kibera in Nairobi and in Villavente, which is an informal settlement in Buenos Aires in Argentina. Why did we select these 2 cities? Well, it could have been other ones, but that's kind of, the reason is because we had research. We have one project in Argentina, and we had a visiting researcher with a scholarship who mirrored some of the research we did in Argentina to Nairobi. And Kibera actually is also one of the biggest informal settlements across Africa. Many of you might know. And well, that's an aerial photography of Kibera, which cynically is just across one of the golf courts in Nairobi. So you see how much open space people in Kibera would have, and then there's a wall next to the golf court. So it's not that these people can access the golf court or use it for whatever, right? And so what is being done in terms of nature-based solutions in Kibera? While it looks not green at all, and there is actually very little space and so on, there is some. So there are very small scale interventions. They look quite minor, but in the end, they together start helping to change the mindsets of people towards nature-based solutions. So what you see, for instance, is some backyard gardens. They might not look super pretty for someone who's used to other, maybe more fancy places, but they do contribute to the local diets already. They have some greening linked to also recycling. So it's different approaches combined. There's also some larger scale interventions which are linked to restoration of the river, and also bringing back some fishes there so that people can also do some fishing again, and again contributes to the diet. So all of that is already in place there. And what we did in the research is, in this case, our PhD student, she went there and did interviews and a survey to see what's being done in terms of climate adaptation, but then also in terms of nature-based solutions, and what is done, who's doing it, what's the perception of the local people around it. Here's a few statements from local people being interviewed. So that's from community members who are living in the area. So they, for instance, recognize the health benefits and say, hey, there's health benefits when river cleanups are done, and that's linked to the river restoration. So it's not always like, they're not using the term nature-based solution because they might not know it, but they do appreciate the benefits that nature brings there for different purposes. And you see, trees have made our area to be cooler, cooling benefits from providing shade and then from the greenery, right? And also the social benefits. So don't underestimate that. So in the end, people in the first place recognize if they have a nice place outside, and then they also recognize the health impacts, maybe a little more in the long run, but also the cooling opportunities. And that's very much linked to the social spaces and the outdoor spaces. So as soon as you have that, maybe that also enriches and helps your community together and do other things there. So they bottom line recognize the multiple benefits. It also came with a few downsides, and one of the key criticism was that how do I say this? Some of these projects were implemented like from outsiders, so in a very top-downish approach, by, even if well-intentioned, by development agencies, by international cooperation, without asking people in the first place, without having their buy-in. So they didn't necessarily know what's happening, and that's why they, to some extent, related more to the ones where locals had some say, and where they also saw, and also in the ultimate, where they saw the benefits. So we saw that the co-production really was a key factor for local acceptance, and also recognizing the benefits in the short and like the medium term after implementation. I'll get back to that in the summary later on. And sorry, I messed up a little bit on the sequencing, sorry. And the others, informal settlement, is Via Vente in Argentina, in the capital city of Buenos Aires. Again, aerial photography, it does not look too different, right? You have all these super densely built up areas. In this case, what you see in between the densely built up area and the green area, oh, and coincidence, another golf court. You see some houses which look a bit more orderly structured. So that's a part of they call it re-urbanization. In the end, it's kind of an urban upgrading process where part of the informal settlement is being transferred into something more formal, and they de-densify it that way. But in this case, this is done in a more participatory way, where people are being involved, and where the community is also super active. Sorry, as I said, I messed up the sequencing. Here, the interventions by and with the community are a little more, may I say, sophisticated already than in Kibera. So here, I think the key difference is that the community is really super well organized. They formed environmental roundtables for years with the help of the local government, though the local government support is a bit depending on the actual government and presidency, but the locals keep pushing, and they have managed to implement a tremendous and very impressive number of interventions, even, well, both in the previous part and now in the newly built up area. So what you see here is they're really starting to green even the new constructions very well. And I couldn't bring enough photos. I would have many more. Including also, for instance, greening a schoolyard, where the kids now see that the shade in the schoolyard really makes a difference. So they now want to play outside in the breaks, no longer inside. And they go home now and tell their parents, hey, you know, I found out something. We got to do this at home too. So that, and we already see we are in that project for a couple of years, supporting local actors, that really has the power to make a difference. But it is the buy-in of the local people. Sorry, here the quotes are slightly longer, but in the end, the bottom line is the same. So for instance, one of the actors said, now everybody proudly tends to their plants. The neighbors seem happier in nature, and their enthusiasm is contagious. When they gather below, sharing mate, there's a stronger sense of community and more reasons to come downstairs. So again, it's the gathering, but it's also that you plant some local herbs and tea, and that you also enrich your diet with it. And here they also say air quality has improved, and each summer we endure less heat. So it's also the protective functions, the climate adaptation, and the risk reduction. And Buenos Aires has been suffering some very severe heat waves in the past. And on the bottom one, you see one quote that where environmental issues first came up, I wasn't really interested. So it's also the perception, maybe, and that's very understandable. People living in such circumstances might not consider environmental things as the first priority if you're not exactly knowing where to make an income and how to feed your family and so. But in the meantime, they saw that it does make a difference. It helps with their living conditions, and they can be demanding. They also saw that other parts of the cities benefited more, so they demanded. For them, this became also a unifier, showing them that they have some power to act and to have some agency, and also to negotiate with others. And as I said, in that project, we're involved for a little longer already now, and it's extremely impressive what they have done. I brought you just one map we did in a recent publication where, and it might be too small to read everything for you right now, but I'm happily sharing the link afterwards, where you see the dots on the map. That's, well, the whole map is via Vente, but in each of these dots, some interventions have taken place. And the green ones are actually physical interventions, kind of only, but most of that is related to nature-based solutions. And orangey ones that are linked to awareness raising. That's, for instance, the Green Schoolyard. It is a recycling workshop that took place, and it's even some murals that they have painted showing climate action themes that are partly also linked to showing how to green and so on. So it's really many different interventions, many of them linked to nature-based solutions, but also to building the related capacities, and also increasingly there's some kind of pride, taking pride in them being the initiators of it and being the ones that are now showcasing it kind of to the outside world. So their action actually has won 3 international prizes over the last year, and they went to the last climate conference in Baku to be awarded there with an international prize. So it looks very small, but it's extremely impressive what they have been doing there, and it's becoming a role model being translated to other cities. And that's done with the help of, you recall in one of the quotes I've said, urban labs. That's exactly how they do it. So it's a kind of a roundtable, it's a kind of regular meeting where they together in the community convene, invite also actors from the city government and from private sector and so on, and together decide and see what they can be doing. And it's done, well, I said we are part of the project. What we're doing is provide input in terms of capacity building, in terms of maybe some other resources, but it's them doing it. But it's also good to see that sometimes appreciation on even the small nature-based solutions they have been implementing then triggers some more acceptance and pride at their end, and then brings it somewhat to the next step. Yeah, that's sorry, I should have kicked that one out. Perhaps that's exactly the project I was talking about. So we're working in these urban labs in 5 cities, and Buenos Aires is one of those. That's this project under the International Climate Initiative of the German government. And the capacity building, but also this more transformative action is really key. So experimentation by seeing what can they plant, how can this be done, how can it be sustained, including learning and then translating it maybe to the next block in their quarter and so on. That's exactly how it was done. And with an eye on the time, I have 3 more slides. How and what can we learn from this? So I believe to unlock all the potentials of nature-based solutions for transformation, we need to look beyond only the effectiveness, which is usually like how we're trying to sell it. Hey, implement nature-based solutions. They're very effective for risk reduction, for climate adaptation. They have a lot of co-benefits. I think we need to look also into the co-benefits as benefits and not just a secondary thing. And that figure, I'm trying to visualize that the society relations, but also the way how it is being implemented and how and by whom it is being designed. These are essential features to unlock this transformative potentials. It's not just about planting some trees to provide shade. If that is done with the community deciding where to do it because maybe they're already gathering there, and who's doing it and whom to involve and how to learn about it, and who would then meet there and so on. That actually, that co-production process is not just one way of doing it. I think it's super essential to later on to unlock the full potentials and also to sustain and maintain whatever has been implemented. And that way, if we think about informal settlements, that means it can not only be a top-down process. That's what even sometimes well-intended things might go wrong if it is just a top-downish process where someone comes, implements something, and then leaves again. We might consider, or they might consider that project a huge success because they have managed to plant X number of trees somewhere, but a couple of years later, that all might have gone if it's not co-produced and accepted and not coming with the related awareness of locals. What are the benefits, and that this is not just something imposed, but something really valuable. I remember the quote from Buenos Aires saying, hey, and then we go down and drink our mate. I think it sounds very little, but that's actually key in the very end. And with that, there's always some enablers, but also some challenges around it. And I've tried to summarize that a bit. So in terms of starting from the top left, in terms of effectiveness, I think to be effective, to unlock the full potential, I think locals and the local community might also, they would definitely need to understand the comparable advantages of nature-based solutions over other ones. Because else they might rather insist, hey, into the concrete wall or something, because it might look very non-techy to them. And also securing the continuity and perhaps the replication elsewhere, while there's very little knowledge around on implementing nature, or not knowledge, I think publications on the actual implementation of nature-based solutions in informality and in global South countries in general. That's also one of the outcomes we found in this global review on eco-DRR we did a couple of years back that Marta and I both were part of. The city's part was big, but looking into anything beyond Europe and Northern America was very little. And well, looking into the society relations, so awareness is absolutely key, and the participatory approaches. So not moving beyond the top-down ones, and it has to be very context-specific. You need to, for instance, look into the local fruit or fiber or veggies and what is acceptable, where to really look to have the full buy-in of locals. And you need to overcome the challenge that NbS are partly, that's what we found, particularly in Nairobi, perceived as too complex and not effective enough. So the perception is still that this is a second-class solution, while they want to have rather the first-class one, which seems to be implemented elsewhere. So again, the awareness is also super important for the design of nature-based solution, as well as, the context sensitivity of the planning and the goals, while lack of knowledge on nature-based solutions and their benefits is definitely a key hurdle here. So that is the perhaps external awareness raising and capacitation that would be needed, and that's often not done to the full extent needed when implementing such a project, because locals might not be considered part thereof. And inclusive implementation can help here. And that can only be done if the local community is actively engaged and is actively part of the, not necessarily the full decision making, but to some extent involved in the decision making, and being treated as an equal partner here, though they're looking at informal context, they're not the ones bringing the budget here. So we always have the very different power, the very challenging power hierarchies, but that has to be actively dealt with in that case. Well, you see that the last challenge I wrote here is the lack of legal instruments. Again, I started from informality as a challenge in itself, because there's very often a lack of, or there is a lack of governance approach. There is a lack of participation. They're not part of the legal decision making, the legal processes, lack of legal documents. So that is also a challenge for NbS and sustaining them. But in the end, last one, if we look and go back to this visualization of sustainability transformation, we need to look into what's the leverage points. How can we leverage and how can we enable and unlock the potentials? And I would believe nature-based solutions have the potential to be, because per design, they can be very inclusive, and they have all these multiple benefits that we're always preaching they have, but they're not always considered to their whole extent in the design. So it would need the learning, it would need the experimentation, it would definitely need the empowerment and the agency and the involvement of local communities living in these contexts, and particularly the ones living in such precarious condition as informality is. And there are the examples, they might be very small, they might not look super impressive, but they're definitely existing. So we just need to look for it and see how can we learn from it and how can we enable it to be replicated. And then I think it would make total sense. And I'm ending on this, and I hope I didn't take too much of your time here. It was a little more than the 30 minutes promised, Marta. Sorry for that.
Sorry, I was muted. It was very interesting talk. I'm sure that there is going to be a lot of questions. We already have one. I also hope you cannot hear the background noise outside of my window. Is this noise bothering you? No, great. Okay, perfect. So for some reason also Zoom thought I was raising my hand, but I'm just Italian. I move my hands. I wasn't asking a question. Okay, so we actually have a question in the chat from Bareya. Bareya is from Pakistan. Bareya is a former student of mine and probably future student of mine in the spring. She's referring to her experience in Pakistan. She says demographics inhabiting slums also feature, lower levels of education. What are some strategies that can be used for a participatory approach for issues such as NbS with individuals who might not have the skill set to grapple with the concepts?
That's a very good question. And I'm definitely not having a super easy answer here. What we, based on our own experience from the project I've mentioned, we're now in the 4th year of it. And in Argentina, the colleagues have been working in that informal settlement even before. Number one is particularly around nature and suitability of certain species for certain contexts. There usually is local knowledge, but it might not be fully tapped. But if you talk to local people, particularly ones living in the area perhaps for a bit longer, they would know about the what to plant and how to sustain and so on. So it's about then finding the right ways of convening people so that they can exchange. And then it takes also people from authorities, from the government, or maybe donors to talk to them. So you, on the one hand, you need to look into what capacities are there, and number two, how to exchange these capacities and talk about what exactly the right approach would look like. I don't want to sound too, my colleague would now say kumbaya-ish, but I've been convinced that actually this absolutely makes sense and is time well invested. Now, there might be additional capacities needed, and what we also found is that very practical examples from elsewhere are very helpful. Don't go with all the terminologies and all the buzzwords. You don't have to call it nature-based solutions, just call it planting trees for something, you know? You don't have to call it, I don't know, climate mitigation or something. Find the right terminologies and then go with examples. And it definitely needs also adjusting whatever capacity building materials to the right audiences. So I wouldn't do the lecture I did now to you to, I don't know, I wouldn't even do it to first semester bachelor students. I would adjust it. So we need to adjust it to audiences.
We have another question in the chat, and then there is a couple of hands up. Oh, actually, we have 3 questions in the chat. But
Okay.
first, Saki is asking, I think Saki is from United Nations University, UNU-CRIS. My question is, to deal with challenges regarding NbS in informal settings, should we first start with capacity building, or should we do it by learning, by doing and just engage them to the process?
Maybe it's a mix thereof. I think starting with capacity building would come with the hiccup that we do not know what exact capacities are needed, because then they might already know something. So I think I would start from actually assessing what capacities are there. And in the past, we have also made good experiences with involving local people into developing then capacity building materials. One of my colleagues even insists that it's not capacity building, but capacity sharing. Per se, I think sometimes it's good to also sometimes get external knowledge because you don't need to reinvent the wheel all the time. But at the same time, if I may say so, I'm a German. If I now go somewhere to whatever country and say, hey, I do know better, that might also not be the best way of doing it. So it's about sharing and saying, hey, but maybe you want to try because that has worked somewhere else. And then, I mean, it's the same as I would talk to you. Sometimes you know a publication I haven't come across and vice versa. So cutting it short, I think capacity building makes sense, but we need to see what capacities are needed and who's then doing it and how.
There is two questions, two hands up. The first that I see on my screen is Simone, and then Dilek, and then we can go back to the chat. Maybe Simone, if you're there, you want to ask?
Yes, I am. Simone here. And thank you, Simone, for the wonderful presentation. I've been getting my name mixed up whenever you call Simone. So my question, linking to sustainability, and that's what I'm trying to focus now, it's the cost. Whenever it seems it's been a barrier, whenever we try to implement some sustainable approach, cost been the biggest barrier, even small locally or large scale. One example, it's products, cleaning products in the small scale. People tend not to buy sustainable products because they tend to be expensive. Is there any other approach, or do you see long run we will get into a point where it will be affordable?
Okay,
All
that's yeah. That's a mean question to ask me on nature-based solution because Marta is the expert on the economics of it.
Yes, yeah.
No, but kidding aside, I mean, one argument used in the context of NbS is that usually it's more economically viable than engineered solutions. Now, speaking about informal settlements, very often there's just nothing happening in there, but looking at the very small scale interventions, as I have mentioned, like greening a schoolyard or one neighborhood that's coming at comparable, okay-ish costs, I would say, it still very often takes external budgets because the community itself might not be able to afford it. But if there's some seed funding, also in our city, we found it quite well, then it's more easy to replicate because you already have a small success story. And that's, again, maybe one advantage of a nature-based solution, that you can start somewhere and then scale it even within the same community because the benefits might then accrue. But yes, I think that the budget and the money is always the key question. And that's the challenge in informal context, that there is no budget.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
The following question is from Dilek.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. I would like to ask a question about my previous project involvement struggle. I involved in a project about policy brief and analyzing the data from local governments, how they prepared for the extreme key heat waves and urban heat islands. So I would well, I was responsible from the Turkey Istanbul local government. When I was checking their master plan, I encountered with a big climate action plan, which also include extreme heat waves. And they were mentioned about nature-based solutions. But when I follow their monitoring reports, I didn't really find something that a continuation of their, what they say they would like to do. So it was, for me, it was a big question mark, like as policymaker or like urban planner, how we should tackle this problem. If also I saw in your earlier slides that effectiveness is it can be struggle. One of the struggle is monitoring and report. Regarding that, I would like to ask. Thank you.
That's a very good one, and I think I don't really have a good answer to that here, because very often nature-based solution projects implemented in such informal context, they're from external donors, and they have as a life cycle of that project, and that usually the financing ends before whatever protective functions, now thinking about adaptation or climate adaptation or risk reduction, is kicking in. Then the project might be over, and the little monitoring that is done might be over before benefits might be in place. So again, in this Via Vente in Buenos Aires example, the community itself, or that urban lab implemented there, that also includes some people from NGOs and local researchers. They themselves have started implementing thermometers and other features to track and to keep tracking the changes that might already be in place because of the vegetation planted, because of the shading provided, and so on. And with that, they hope that they can make the case. But yes, it would require additional efforts, and I would really hope that maybe by a few case studies or by a few outstanding examples, it's easier to convince. I think when we started working on NbS like a decade ago, we still needed to make the case for it. Now with a very few, few like lighthouse projects, also on economic feasibility and on the sustainability and what are like the long year outcomes and benefits, that has already become easier, but it does not necessarily help with the local monitoring process. So I think that's all I can say here. But yeah, it's definitely a thing overlooked here.
There are two contributions in the chat. The first one is a question, and the second one
it's a publication. Cool.
It's just a reference to a project. So I actually would like to start from the second one. Ritika is describing or pointing us to the Bangalore slums project to boost livelihoods, well-being, and social capital. So there is a link there for those who are interested, and for Simone, who might actually already know this project. And then there is a question from Alok. I'm not super familiar with informal urban settlements, but knowing the political barriers involved in trying to focus on vulnerable groups, which are systematically overlooked by national or local governments in any country, how do you conduct research and participatory projects internationally in a meaningful way with these communities while getting the approval from governments who do not necessarily formally represent them? Any thoughts?
Oh, that's another very good one. So number one is in neither of the cases I have presented you, we would need the okay of the government to talk to people. So in that case, in these cases, we did not need something like a research permit, which I do know are obligatory for other countries you might work in, and then it might be way more difficult, including security aspects and so on. In this case, the colleague who did the research from Kenya, she's Kenyan. That definitely helps. the colleagues working in Via Vente, they're Argentinian, and the colleagues of mine going there for like in this participatory and long-term observation, they do speak Spanish. So I think the permission is one thing. Sometimes it might also require the permission of the locals, and that might not necessarily be a very formal process. Just as an example, a couple of years back, I did research on reducing landslide risk in favelas in Rio de Janeiro, and well, we went in with the colleagues from civil defense because they were basically in one of these favelas the only ones that would still go. But we were shown around by the locals, and they were also very outspoken on where we would be going and where we're not going and where we're definitely not taking any photos. So that's definitely part of it too. But the other part of the question, I think, is the meaningful engagement. And that is, I mean, as a researcher, I would always say on eye level. And if you could also argue that for parties, also sorry, for transformative research, if you do this in a co-design and collaborative way, there is a lot of studies and researchers that say that then you also need to do research in a different way, which means being involved in this co-design process, and that involves that requires some more long-term engagement on the ground. That's not always possible in all research projects. But in this one that I've mentioned now, we, for instance, are working with local researchers in each of the 5 cities doing ethnographic studies. So they, for more than a year now, go to every meeting of this urban lab where they do the decision making on what to do, and also visioning exercises, what they want their community to look like in a couple of years, and so on. And they do take notes on how that is happening, and if we do already see changes on how, for instance, these power hierarchies might be overcome and so on. So in that sense, it's definitely also getting used to a different way of researching, which is definitely no longer I'm going there, I'm collecting data, I'm publishing a scientific paper, and if you read it, fine. If not, I'm taking the data anyway.
So thank you for these very helpful answers and interesting insights about the reality of research in the field. It's always adventurous.
Yes.
Is there any other question for Simone? It's 11, we can wrap up now, but if you, Simone, have any parting words, suggestions, tips. Simone also, I want to emphasize that Simone provided several materials for you to peruse. As I mentioned in my previous announcements via email also yesterday, these materials are available on online in our class folder. And I just wanted to ask Simone if she has any other suggestion or thought she would like to share with the students before we say goodbye.
No, but you know my email address, so whenever there is something, drop me a message.
Thank you so much, Simone. I really appreciate your time. It's been very pleasant to have you here and learn from you. You made us travel a lot this morning. Thank you for your participation. And I think there is a round of applause, even if it's virtual, from everybody for this lovely talk. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you. Thanks for all the questions. See you. Good luck with your summer school. Oh, winter school. It's not summer. It's winter school. Sorry, I just talked to colleagues.
Well, you know, we have people from the Southern Hemisphere, so it works.
That's so true. No, I was just chatting with colleagues in Latin America, and I also had to overcome this. Oh, no, it's summer holidays, right? Bye.
Bye. Bye. And so, dear students, we're going to have another talk in a few minutes, around 11:10. The talk is going to be by Professor Sanae Okamoto. I will let Didi introduce Sanae. Didi is going to manage the second part of this class. I don't know if Didi is here. Maybe she's gonna come on in a couple of minutes for the second part of the class. What I wanted to mention are a couple of announcements. The first one is, if you have questions about the assignments, please let us know. You know the names of our assistants by now. If you have doubts about where to put the assignment, where to save the assignment, should I send the assignment, ask our assistants. They're going to help you with everything. And the answer is, you should just upload your notes in the same Google Doc where everybody's writing their commentary. The idea of having one common document for everybody is that you are going to be able to read each other's notes, and it's going to be very interesting. I don't know if you had an opportunity to peruse the comments and reflections of your peers, but it's been very interesting for me to read them. The other announcement, and this is in relation to the email you received from Sanya. As you know, Sanya, Divina, and Ishan are hosting cafe discussion sessions where you can hop in and say a few words to your peers, get to know each other, and also share thoughts about what you've been learning in class. Sanya sent a Google form. You can join by signing up. There were some issues related to access to this form. If you still have problems, notify Sanya, but I think the form accessibility has been resolved, so there should be no issues. I think Nidhi is here.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, Marta. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Nidhi. I don't think Sanaya is here already, but I was just explaining to the students that you're going to take over the second part of the class. I'm going to make you host now, Nidhi.
Okay, and I'll also maybe check on the phone with Sunny, maybe because of the time confusion or something. I'm sure she confirmed a minute ago, but we'll see.
You are now officially the host of the Zoom session. The Zoom session is still being recorded, and it will continue being recorded. I will need to leave around 11:15 to attend the pre-existing engagement that unfortunately I couldn't cancel. And it's
No,
really
not a problem. Take your time. It's okay. I mean, it's a collaborative effort. I'm happy to step in. And are you looking for a 5-minute break now? In the meanwhile, I'll
Yes,
check
that's
with.
what I was suggesting. Maybe you can take 10 minutes break and then you can start with Sanaya at 11:15. How does it sound? 11:15 East would be 5:15 in Central Europe.
Okay, then see you in 10.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye, Nidhi. Thank you for
Bye-bye. See
taking
you
over this
next.
part. Bye-bye.
No problem. Bye-bye.